Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I answer your automotive questions, or at least I attempt to, and sometimes butcher your names. Apologies for that in advance. A few things before I get started. I am taking these questions from the Google Plus event, so that's where you post your questions if you want your question answered on this show. If you're watching this on YouTube, I cannot see those questions that get posted to YouTube. That happens actually after the event concludes, so I won't be able to answer those questions. You can always go to EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a wealth of information there to help you. Also, I'd like to remind you that tonight's episode, or show, if we want to call it, is sponsored by Advance Auto. So it is a special hour-long show. There will also be links in the description to their resources to help you with any automotive issues you might have. And tonight, I am joined by a special guest, Jim Bates. Unfortunately, we're having some technical difficulties getting the video to work, but I have him on the phone here, so we're going to kind of do it old school, and he's going to be helping me answer your questions. Are you there, Jim?
I am here.
So there he is on the magic phone. So
yeah.
Jim Bates on the magic phone, and Eric the Car Guy here to help answer your automotive questions. So Jim, could you tell us a little bit about your background real quick, just so that we can let our audience know who you are and how you can help us?
Well, let's see, I've been with Advance Auto Parts for quite a long time, about 15 years now. I've been in the automotive aftermarket for over 40 years. I started out drag racing and they built dragsters, did some motocrossing, got married, had to get a real job, and went to work for an automotive company called Manufacturing. And from there to Wells Manufacturing, I was there for 23 years. And retired from there, went to work for Advance, putting training programs together. Ran around the country like a crazy person for 15 years, doing live workshops for technicians in shops, covering things mostly drivability diagnostics, but the last 5 or 6 years or so, usually hybrid workshops. I would service hybrid vehicles and drivability stuff, things like that. Did about 200 training videos for Advance Auto Parts. You'll find them on their website, advanceautoparts.com, and about 50 training videos for the working technicians in the shop. And the last year and a half or so, I have a YouTube channel where every Wednesday I post a video for technicians and enthusiasts on things that our viewers ask me to do.
So I'm going to say we got the right guy on the phone.
Well, we'll see.
All right. Well, why don't we start off with the first one, Jim? We've got one here from Junka Olafson. Hey, Eric, thanks for doing this. You're awesome. I'm in the middle of restoring an old car, and I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on replacing the hood, doors, and boot lid for fiberglass ones. More specifically, do you think going to this will have a negative effect when it comes to crash safety, pun intended? The original steel in this car is quite thin, and the original body panels I'm talking about are beyond rescue. Note that the fiberglass panels I have in mind are made from the exact molds and are of the proper quality. My intentions are to save weight and also completely avoid any rust issues in the far future. Stay dirty. So you have any thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, yeah, the fiberglass panels are great. They look good. They're easy to maintain, but there is going to be that crash safety issue. To tell you the truth, the only experience I've had with fiberglass panels was on a pro stocker. A partner of mine had a pro stocker at one time. And, the fiberglass panels were great. They worked real well. They were subject to cracking, though, from vibration. I remember that. The little 200-mile-an-hour racer tape always came in handy from time to time to try to keep things down when we wanted to, and, stuck to where they should be. So I don't know. I think probably from an aesthetic point of view, and certainly perhaps maybe even a mileage point of view, some lightweight fiberglass panels will work real well. But to his point, there will be a crash safety issue. They're not going to add any type of structural support whatsoever in case of a collision.
Well, I would think on older vehicles, they weren't necessarily designed to crumple like modern vehicles are. So in essence, they weren't necessarily as safe from the gate. So, as far as improving crash safety or diminishing crash safety, I think that's sort of a wash in a sense, just because, I mean, you're dealing with an older vehicle to start with, possibly with a rigid frame, and that's not going to absorb an impact the same way a newer vehicle would. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. The same sort of a thing. You know, they're not going to absorb anything on an impact, but on an older vehicle, thinking about that, maybe it's structurally more secure than some of these newer vehicles with, you know, thinner metal and stuff. I don't know. Maybe it's a wash on that. But basically, like I said, the only experience I've had was on the race car. So I'm probably just going to think that, yep, they're going to look good, but I'm not too sure about crash safety at the end.
Well, if you're talking about a race car, I'm assuming you probably got a roll cage in there anyway, and that's your crash safety there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I suppose to answer your question, Jonka, as far as the type of vehicle you're dealing with, and I would say with the weight savings and the fact that he's trying to eliminate any corrosion issues in the future, you know, as far as safety issues, that may be inherent to the vehicle, and it may have nothing to do with the panels he uses, but he may be able to accomplish what he's looking to accomplish by, you know, as far as the aesthetics and saving weight by installing the panels.
Oh yeah, if it was me, I'd do it. You know, on the older vehicle, the metal is thin, like he says, and he wants to get it looking pristine as he can. I would definitely go with the fiberglass panels. I was just trying to address the safety issue, so
Right.
that's going to be there. But I would do it. It's going to look good. It's going to be easy to maintain, and I think he's going to be happy with his choice in the end.
Well, sure. And when you're dealing with an older vehicle, you're not necessarily building for safety. Sure, you want it to be safe, but at the same time, like you mentioned, aesthetics is pretty much what you're going for. So he's good.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next one. We've got Austin Strand. Hey, Eric, I'm coming up on my second year of driving a manual transmission. Needless to say, it can be fun in the Washington, D.C. traffic. My question is, which is better for the clutch, going between first and second? Burning it for 1/2 to 3/4 of a second, or having a slightly rougher engagement, or having a slightly rougher engagement? This may be my self-consciousness, because other people, a fair amount, also drive a stick. Thanks for your time and stay dirty. Feel free to butcher my name. No, Austin, I got that name, so thank you. But I think what he's asking is like, if how to clutch in traffic is kind of my takeaway from this. Personally, I think the less you're on the clutch, the better, the longer it's going to last. Because if you're slipping the clutch, it's like it wears it out much quicker. The engine is always going to be rotating. For me, one of the tricks that I often used in traffic was second gear. And I would just leave it in second gear and just sort of roll forward a little bit. That way it wasn't so harsh when it engaged in first. How about you, Jim? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. The less time on the clutch, the better. I've driven a manual transmission off and on for seems like all my life, and that 1/2 second or 3/4 second thing that he mentioned, I kind of understand that, and it seems like it's what you do when you let off on the clutch sort of easily, mm-hmm. rather than just popping the clutch, so
right.
to speak. And I think that popping the clutch is obviously going to be a little bit rough on the drivetrain and kind of a tricky ride. For me, just letting the clutch out smoothly is the thing. And I think when you do that, you're going to get a bit of rotation or burn, like you said. Mm-hmm. That's basically the way you drive these things. You just don't want to let it out really, really slow and, have the clutch take forever to engage. That's just going to cause a lot of wear on the disc and, have a shorter life. So just try to drive it normally. Take your time. Obviously, you don't pop the clutch, but you don't let it spin too much either. But that's a kind of a hard thing to talk about. Mentally you think about that. It's like, I don't pop the clutch, but, I don't spend a whole lot of time letting it out either.
Right.
It takes practice.
It definitely takes practice. And I also think it's vehicle dependent as well. I think the egregious offenders are the ones that are like sitting on the hill or at the stoplight or something like that and slowly letting out the clutch and just sort of letting the car rock back and forth. Those are the people that just sort of burn my biscuits, honestly. Well, not really. I just think of that as an income opportunity because I know they'll be in for a clutch soon. But I think that's the worst thing as far as putting too much wear on the clutch. Is just purposely wearing the clutch out. But it sounds like, you know, I realize you're new to driving a stick. I'm speaking to Austin now. I realize you may be new to driving a stick, but this is something that will come in time. And you know, you did mention you might be being a little overly self-conscious about it, but at that time, you know, it's like Jim said also, it's just sort of something you just sort of have to feel. It's very difficult to describe in a situation like this, how to actually drive it. I have a video on how to drive a stick. Whether or not that's helpful to you, I'm not sure, but I'll put a link to that in the description so you can check that out later. But let's move on to the next one. We have Scott Mazies. Hey, Eric, thanks for all the videos and all you do. I've learned a lot. I have a 1987 Toyota Corolla sedan, 315,000 kilometers with a 1.6 liter 4ALC carbureted single overhead cam engine that idles very rough when cold, but perfectly fine when warm. In the wintertime, I also have to hold the throttle open slightly for 30 seconds to a minute after starting, or the car will stall. Over the last few months, I've replaced the fuel, air filters, PCV valve, cap, rotor, wires, plugs, because they were overdue maintenance items anyway. Car runs better and gas mileage went up, but idle did not improve much. What is my next step for troubleshooting? Also, any other general advice to keep older cars going is also appreciated. Jim, I'm going to jump on this and think maybe he's got a problem with the clutch. Or not the clutch. I mean choke. I'm on the last question.
Yeah. That was my first thought. Definitely, look at the choke.
Yeah, that's clutch, choke, same thing. but yeah, it's that butterfly that's on the top of the carburetor when you first start the vehicle. Well, I suppose it could also be a choke pull-off issue if it's not working correctly. But that choke plate is designed to not allow as much air in, so you have a more rich mixture when you first start the vehicle. And if it's open too far when you first start it up, or it will upset that mixture and it won't be able to run correctly. And then as you said, if it warms up, that mixture starts to reach more of an equilibrium and the engine begins to run fine. So I've actually done a video on carburetor adjustments, and choke adjustment was one of the things that I had in there. For me, it's a thing with feel, just enough spring tension that's on there to get the thing to close, and then it needs to open ever so slightly when you first start the engine. That's why I mentioned choke pull off, because that's supposed to be active when you first start it. So it's supposed to be closed, but it's supposed to crack open slightly. Usually if there's a problem with a choke pull off, it's like a start stall kind of situation. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, all of that, but there's just one other thing I might want to suggest. Take a look at the sort of the underside of the throttle plate itself, mostly where the throttle plate hits the venturi when it's closed. And if you get too much carbon built up there, it could be that the throttle plate is not completely closed, and therefore you have too much air going through, and and then the choking mechanism isn't going to do its job properly. You'll find that that throttle plate needs to be all the way closed. There are two little holes in it, probably two holes in it, that will allow us a metered amount of air to go through there during the choking operation. And I think that if you have too much carbon in there, and I've seen this in the past, that could be part of the problem. He said he has to hold the throttle plate open for just a little bit, so that when you have not enough choke, that, of course, is going to keep the engine running properly. But when the choke plate is closed and your throttle plate is open, then you could have the opposite effect. So I would look at definitely carbon up underneath the throttle plate to see if that might be part of the problem.
Maybe a good carburetor cleaning, like get in there with some carburetor cleaner, maybe open the throttle and try to spray some stuff down there to help break any of that up that might be causing that throttle plate to hang up.
Yeah, that, and if you can reach it, I would go down in there with a rag on your finger or something too to help get the black stuff off. You'll see if it's there. You'll definitely see it, and you'll want to get it off any way you can. Carburetor cleaner definitely works to dissolve it, but sometimes getting at it is another problem, because sometimes when you squirt carburetor cleaner through the little spray wand at it, it'll get on there, but it won't blast it off, so to speak. You may need to rub it off or something.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But I've messed with some of those older carburetors on those Asian vehicles, and they have quite a few vacuum lines going to them also. So there's you think maybe there's potential for a possible vacuum leak issue or something like that that may also contribute?
That's always a possibility, although it would have to be a pretty big one. But hey,
Right.
it doesn't hurt to check. And by the way, when you use the carburetor cleaner, be sure to aim them at all of the little holes and little ports that you see down in the venturi and stuff, and make sure they're all cleaned out as well.
Right. Yeah, because those air bleeds and things like that are also important that allow the carburetor to work properly. But yeah, they do get old. It's a mechanical device. As far as that choke goes, it's on a thermostatic spring. That thermostatic spring has gone through several cycles since 1987. If it's the original one that's been on there, it's not surprising that it might get a little weak and not close the choke plate enough. But personally, I think I'd be looking at that choke first just to see if that was the issue.
Yeah, I would too. And you bring up a good point about the spring of the choke getting weak. That can happen. I remember having a vehicle one time that seemed like every winter I'd have to tighten it up, and then every spring I'd have to loosen it up to get it to work right. I didn't want to replace it, but it had a weak spring, and that was the problem.
I kind of like old mechanical things like that. It just reminds me of what's working and what's not working. I like to tinker. Maybe that's why I like carburetors.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I agree. They were fun to play with. They were something you had to do to get it working right and keep it working right. But on the other hand, it was fun for me anyway. I enjoyed that sort of thing. I remember putting points and condensers in twice a year. I thought that was fun. Today, people would think that was awful.
It's all fun and games until you're late for work, right?
Right.
All right, let's move on to the next one. I've got Joe Ham Radio. Hello, Eric. I want to thank you for the last time I asked you about my EGR valve problem on my 99 Chevy Suburban 5.7 liter. I've replaced it and did a drive cycle after clearing the codes, and it's working fine now. No check engine light. I'm starting my next repair, which is AC work, and I know you hate talking about AC work, but here's the problem. It hasn't worked, I'm guessing, for a few years before I got it, so I wanted to see if there was leaks and filled it with dye, and it looked like it leaked out the Schrader valve, so I replaced it, and now it holds pressure. I did vacuum down the system, but it doesn't quite get that cold, only about 50 degrees or so, and that's at 2,000 RPM. Should I replace the accumulator? I noticed the clutch makes a bad squealing noise, so I may replace the clutch as well. But what are your thoughts about the accumulator, please? Thanks for all your great work and info. Stay dirty, Joe. Well, I'm glad the EGR thing helped. Jim, what are your thoughts on the AC thing that's going on here?
A couple of things. First of all, if the clutch is squealing, we need to make sure that it is engaging and turning the compressor properly so that it's getting enough coolant through the system to make it work properly. But that's not what I think was going on. He probably doesn't know how much oil there is in the system. Maybe somebody's put too much in there, and the oil in the system is coating everything, and so that the heat transfer in the evaporator isn't going to work properly, and or maybe even the condenser's not working properly either. So first of all, got to make sure you got enough pressure in the system, enough refrigerant. And if you're going to replace the accumulator, he's going to have to flush the whole system because he's going to open the system. Mm-hmm. I think flushing the system and getting all the oil out of it that might be clinging to everything, and then go ahead and put a new accumulator in if you would like to do that, perhaps an expansion valve or an orifice tube, whatever it takes. And I think that is going to make a big difference in the temperature of the air coming out.
I'm glad you mentioned that orifice tube, because if memory serves, as far as GM products of that particular vintage, they did have some issues there.
No, yeah, absolutely. And it gets plugged up and restrict the flow. As probably everybody knows, that when the refrigerant goes to the orifice tube, it drops the pressure. It's a spray, and if it can't get through the orifice tube, the actual pressure drop isn't as good as it should be, and you're not going to wind up with as cold air as you should have. So, but even though you have a partially plugged up orifice tube, you should still get fairly cold air anyway, maybe even down to maybe in the 40s somewhere, I would guess, on that system if everything else is working okay. So I would definitely want to be flushing that system out and make sure that it's got all the oil out of the system, all the excess oil, and then we put in new refrigerant and the proper amount of oil, and again replacing the oil filter with it. I think it'll be in pretty good shape. But that squealing clutch, that may be another secondary problem. It could be adding to it, maybe not. But that, I guess, for that to be taken care of too.
Well, certainly the squealing clutch is an issue, but something I also thought of, it depends on how hot and the humidity of the day, because the heat load on the system is also going to dictate what he goes down to. If it's 95 degrees and 95% humidity, 50 degrees is actually pretty darn good.
You're right. It really is. I've seen 47 degrees on a system that was it was in tip-top shape, and that was great. Just because, like you say, the heat load.
Right.
So, yeah, I guess we don't have any information as we again with the thing. So that could be a factor. There's a lot of things to consider with AC. Nobody would hate answering these questions on AC. There's so many things.
Jim, you nailed it.
Really know.
You totally nailed it. And I was going to actually use that as a summary at the end, because I was going to keep throwing these things out. I was actually going to go to the noise next and say, well, if he did put too much oil in, like you suggested, that could be causing the compressor to work too hard, in which case it would cause the clutch to slip and possibly cause that noise. Then there's a possibility that there's something going on with the drive belt that's actually not driving it enough. So when the load of the compressor goes on, say you got a tensioner that's going bad or something like that, the belt starts to slip on the compressor. The compressor is not able to turn enough to move the refrigerant through the system effectively, and therefore it would not cool as efficiently. So yes, I hate answering AC questions because there's like a gajillion things that could go wrong.
Yeah, it goes on and on and on. But I will say this, absolutely, if you open up the system, you're going to go ahead to replace that accumulator and the orifice tube and flush it, and then it'll end up with a whole lot better job than what you got now.
I would also suggest like maybe grabbing the front part of the compressor clutch with the engine off, obviously, and try to spin it by hand. If you experience a great deal of difficulty trying to turn that, because that's actually splined directly to the compressor itself. If you can't turn the compressor by hand, then there could be a problem with the compressor, and I wouldn't put it past the GM compressor to have a problem.
I would agree, absolutely.
Let's move on to the next one, which is also an AC question from Andy Sama, and it's, hey Eric, thanks for all the great videos. My question is, when you pull a vacuum on an AC system, does it pull the AC oil out of the AC system also? Thanks for your expertise. So on that, I say no. How about you, Jim?
Oh yeah, no, you do not. When you pull the vacuum, what you do is just change the boiling point of the water, and it just turns to steam, and that's what comes out. Not oil, but steam, water. That's what you're getting out of the system when you put a vacuum on it.
Yeah, the oil's too heavy. It stays in the system.
Right.
Yeah, so that was an easy one to answer. Moving on to, well, actually another one from Andy. He has an 05 Acura TSX, and every now and again when he first starts off in the day, he hears what he believes to be a VTC actuator rattle noise. It only lasts for about 2 to 3 seconds, then it's gone. I found a few YouTube videos with the noise that I hear, but I want to know if it is going to damage the engine at some point, or is it just a nuisance and nothing to worry about? Thanks for your reply. I'm somewhat familiar with this, and I also did a little bit of research beforehand. The VTC actuator on this engine, it's a K-series engine. What it has is variable valve timing with I guess with intelligence or whatever. Well, no, maybe that was Toyota Systems. Anyway, instead of just varying lift and duration, it also varies the cam timing via the cam gears. And this actuator is something that controls the movement of that cam gear. So if it's not functioning properly, it gets starved for oil first thing when you start it up, and you can have basically a timing chain rattle at that time. I believe that there's I looked it up, and for later models, they had a TSB where you would replace that actuator to correct this problem. But I can also say, particularly on these Honda engines, it's imperative that you're using the correct viscosity oil. And if I'm not mistaken, that one I think may take 0W20, not sure. So make sure you're using the correct oil, because not using the correct oil is one of the main causes of any VTEC type problems that I've run into. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Jim.
You nailed it. I'm sure there's a TSP on that, but those things the oil can drain out of them when they sit for a while, and so when you start the engine up, your oil pressure fills it back up again, or puts whatever drained out of it back in there to keep it lubricated. And if it's not lubricated, it grinds and makes all kinds of noise. Now, here's the thing: the orifices are so small on some of these variable time mechanisms of all different types of cars, not just the Acura, but some Fords and things come to mind. So if you don't have a 020 oil, if that's what it takes for a lighter viscosity oil, you can't move those through those orifices fast enough, and so you have oil starvation problems, retarded timing, all kinds of things on some vehicles. So I'm with you 100%. Number one, yep, you got to put the right kind of oil in there. Check the TSD, and if those things grind enough, they're going to wear out, and you have to replace them anyway. If the parts are going to become damaged in itself. So that's something that you have to worry about if it continues to do it, even with the correct oil. It may already be damaged, but again, make sure you got the right oil in there to fill it back up again, to replace the oil that drained out of it when it was sitting parked overnight.
Yeah, and if they're still in it, if you're not using the correct oil and you have changed the oil and you still continue to have the issue, looking towards that VTC solenoid might be helpful to you. And when I looked it up, the TSP was actually, I believe, for let's see, what was it, 05s? Or no, 2010 was what they were for. So that's what I found when I looked that up before the show. Well, let's move on to another one. We've got, here's a name I'm going to butcher. We got Chitsanicha Simbai, something like that. He has a 2005 VW Touran. The problem comes from transmission. When the vehicle heats up, or if I travel at 5 kilometers, the gear shift become hard or hesitant. I've put the car diagnostic, but there is not been trouble codes for the transmission. What could cause this? Thanks for your reply. Do you want to start with this one?
Well, let's see. Couple of thoughts come to mind. First of all, is when it heats up, he has the issue. So I'm wondering if when the oil itself in the transmission is heating up as well, along with the engine, and it is causing some problems, maybe becoming thin. And has the transmission oil and filter been changed recently? What is the pressure of the pump in the transmission? And those are things that really need to be looked at and verified before we can move further. Beyond that, I don't have any other immediate thoughts. I think about that for a few moments. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting that there are no codes associated with it. I would think with a 2005, it would be pretty Johnny on the spot as far as setting codes if there was an actual shifting problem. I'm with you as far as the fluid is concerned, because it seems to be something that's heat related. And as it heats up is when it starts to fail. And automatic transmissions are extremely dependent upon the fluid that's in them. So if there is an issue with fluid as it warms up, then nothing will function on the transmission correctly. But once again, I would think that something with, if it was like an electronic issue with like a solenoid or some sensor or something like that, I would think that it would set a code. But since it's not, I think it's something that's quite possibly mechanical in nature. And the first place I would look is at the fluid.
Yep, that's what I think.
Okay, so check your fluid level, and if it's older fluid, you might consider changing the fluid and filter and then retrying it. Make sure you put the correct fluid in there. I'm not sure about those VWs, but I know some vehicles are very specific about the automatic transmission fluid you use. And if you don't use the correct fluid, you could have problems exactly like you described. So it's extremely important to use the correct fluid in an automatic transmission, especially on modern vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that certain manufacturers put different types of fluids in there so that the driver can feel the shift, or other manufacturers don't want to feel the shift. So maybe that feels like a hard shift to some people or not. So yeah, I think at this point, it's definitely zeroing in on fluid. Cool.
We've got Robert Pulaski. '05 Odyssey alarm problem. Goes off with the proper key. Opening doors also. I've disconnected the hood latch sensor with no luck. Tried resetting the alarm per owner's manual. Holds for a short time, then returns. Looking at driver's door actuator, but I'm not sure it's that either. Is there a way to disable this part of the alarm? I disconnected the horns for nuisance reasons. Help, thanks in advance. Stay dirty, have fun. Should Well, as far as I'll start on this one, Jim. As far as the hood latch, disconnecting that, yes, hood latch switches on Hondas are a common problem to set off alarms, and unplugging them basically makes it so that it's sending a signal back to the alarm saying that everything's fine. So disconnecting that. But your approach of parts replacement isn't necessarily the way to go. Yes, that hood latch is a common problem, and disconnecting a connector is not going to cost you any money or cause any problems. But to then start going towards the door lock actuator, that might not be the right way to go. However, I will also say that door lock actuators are also a problem that cause the alarms to go off. Really, the only way to know is to see if you can get in there and find out what's setting that code. I believe that's new enough to where if you had the proper scan tool, you could go in and actually see what was causing that alarm to set, and that would help you pinpoint the problem. What are your thoughts, Jim?
Well, I don't have a ton of experience with this, but I do know that occasionally you can have some corroded connectors or high resistance, which is basically going to cause, in some switches, the way they operate, the same amount of things. So looking at those connectors as they're disconnected or reconnected might be something that could be helping to cause this problem. I'm not sure, but that's one of the thoughts that came into my mind as I was listening to you, and I'm thinking about how these different switches send signals to the alarm. And, high resistance is also the same thing as, I'm not all open yet. So that could be part of it.
Well, actually, you nailed it, because the problems that I do see with hood latch switches and also the driver's door lock actuator that I mentioned are problems with contacts inside those sealed units. So, I mean, you nailed the problem. It's just, those are the two most common areas for that to have that problem. But it would just be nice to know what it is before you dove in and said, okay, I'm going to go out and buy a door lock actuator and hope for the best.
A quick way to check that to see if this is what it is. The problem we're now addressing is using a voltmeter and doing something called, dare I say, a voltage drop test across the switch. Everybody goes, oh no, I don't know how to do that. Well, all you do is you have the system on and put your voltmeter across the terminals, and switches should not drop voltage, so you should get 0 on your meter when you do that. And if you get anything other than that, you can expect that there's resistance or something in those connections in that switch that is adding to the problem.
I agree with that 100%, but I'll tell you right now that driver's door lock actuator is not accessible unless you remove it from the vehicle. And by that time, but yeah, that certainly would help you verify the issue that was going on there. It's just, like I said, that's kind of a difficult one. It's down inside the door in deep, dark places behind the window tracks and everything else. So they didn't make it easy.
No, I guess not. So in this case, never mind.
Well, no, you could do that. I suppose you could.
The voltage drop test is hopefully a good idea to keep in mind when you can get at these things.
Right.
There's a quick way to verify your suspicion.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And now, since we're like halfway through the program, I just want to remind you that we are going for an hour tonight. I have Jim Bates on the phone with me, helping to answer your automotive questions. And tonight's show is brought to you by Advance Auto. So moving on to the next one, Jonathan Ritter. He's sorry he missed the meetup. I'm sorry I missed you too, Jonathan. 2005 Chevy Impala, 140,000 miles. He recently discovered that he can pull the key out of the ignition while the car is running, and the car continues to run. I'm able to reinsert the key and it continues to run. Your thoughts? I think this is an easy one, Jim. Go for it.
Yeah, I think this is one of these switches that is tied up in the GM issue. Because they had some switches that put a little bit of weight on the key, and that would either turn it or the tumblers wouldn't hold. And this is one of those cases where I'm not sure so much about turning it, but the tumblers aren't holding, and the key will come in and out. I've had that on other vehicles, older vehicles too, where things just get worn out. The key could even be just worn out. So I'm not really sure exactly what the cause is, but it's just one of those things that it does happen, and it may be caught up in the GM ignition switch thing right now, which, if it is, they take care of it under warranty, wouldn't they?
Well, the ignition switch, I think, is two parts. I mean, there's the mechanical portion that has the tumblers and everything in it, and then there's the electrical portion. And I think the two are separate. So you can replace one or the other. And I'm not 100% certain, but I almost think the GM ignition switch issue involves the electrical portion. This to me sounds like the mechanical portion, like you mentioned, just the tumblers or something like on that, the inside is worn out.
Yeah, well, I think what they were talking about is that the weight of the key and ring and whatever's on there would actually move the switch into the accessory position rather than the run position, and so stuff doesn't work.
Right.
But at the same time, if you have enough weight on there, you can actually move the key, like you see the mechanical part of it. The tumblers in the lock are holding the key. I think it's just the right way to say that. So the lock itself doesn't have a grasp on the key, and the key can be taken in and out. So either that part of the lock that holds the key is worn out or damaged, or the key itself is worn and damaged, and it won't stay in.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of people with like the convenience store bathroom key type keychains where they've got like a 2x4 hanging from it, and they wonder why they have trouble with their ignition switches.
Exactly.
I think I know.
Exactly.
I think I know the people that you're talking about. So ignition switch issue there. As far as a safety issue, why not check to see if it's covered under warranty? Because if it is, well, you get it replaced.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it comes to mind that one of my kids had a vehicle not long ago, and I can't remember if it was a Jeep or what. But you could take the key in and out of it when it was running, and it was an older vehicle, and everybody just thought it was kind of funny. But we just did it, and it just turned out to be a worn out lock cylinder.
Right. And you can, if you want to continue to use your same key. Now, if your key is already worn out, it's kind of like, what's the point? But if you want a key that actually matches your doors and you want to continue to do that, that is possible. A locksmith can actually rekey a new lock cylinder to work with your old key. So that is something that's possible. You just have to consult a locksmith first.
Yeah, it's not too hard to change either. Well, I suppose on some vehicles maybe, but it's not a big job, and you can buy those sets, key with lock cylinders. It comes with two keys, I guess, and for repairing any worn out lock cylinder like that.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the next one, Jim. We've got Alex Strahl. Hey, Eric, great show. You have saved my butt and my wallet many times. Thanks. Glad to do it. I have a 2004 Dodge Intrepid 3.5 liter high output, 160,000 miles. I'm having a weird issue. When I start the car in the morning on my way to work, it starts very quickly within a second. I drive to the gas station down the road, get a drink for the day, car is all warmed up, running well. I turn off the car, go inside for the beverage, approximately 5 minutes, go to start the car, and I have to crank for about 5 seconds for it to turn over. Also, it sputters for a second or two, but then when running, runs like a champ. I only have the dreaded P0420 code right now. Here in Indiana, we don't have emissions testing, had many other cars with P0420, and none of them did this weird issue during starting. Any thoughts? My first thought is possibly an evaporative emissions problem. Jim, what do you think?
Maybe, but my first thought is a dripping fuel injector.
Oh.
And it's flooding, and but I would check on that first. Do a leak down test on the injectors. The P0420 doesn't have anything to do with it. That's the catalyst efficiency one, isn't it? As I recall. So
yeah, that's correct.
Either a catalyst issue or a rear oxygen sensor issue that needs to be looked at. But in this particular case, I thought maybe it's just a dripping fuel injector.
And a quick way to do that, I actually have a video on checking fuel pressure, and I show how to isolate the system to find out as it leaks down. And basically what you do is you hook up a fuel pressure gauge to the system, and you don't necessarily even have to start the vehicle. You can just turn it on, and the pressure should jump up. And then when you turn it off, that pressure should hold for a good long time. I would say at least 30 minutes, And you're talking about 5 minutes here, but if it's unable to hold that pressure is going somewhere. Now, it could be going back into the fuel tank, sometimes there's a check valve inside fuel pumps that actually is supposed to hold a bit of pressure in the line. Normally, when you have a problem with that, you have a hard time getting the thing to start in the morning every time, not after you go to the store or go to get something and to come back out. But as Jim mentioned, if you do have a leaking injector, what happens is you go into the store, and while you're in there, that injector is leaking, putting gas into the engine, which basically floods it. So you go to restart it, and the mixture's all off, it's flooded, it doesn't want to start until like maybe you press on the gas or something like that. It allows some extra air to come in to mix with that fuel, and then it's actually able to start. So the way to determine that, or the way I determine that, is I still have the fuel pressure gauge on there, but I crimp off the return line. If it still bleeds down, then I know that the leak is on the engine side and not on the fuel tank side. So that's how I usually go about that, to try to figure out where the leak is, if there is indeed one of those leaks. Anything you have to add to that, Jim?
You nailed it. That's exactly the way I would check it too. But if we do find that it's leaking down, then there's the question of, well, what do we do about that? So I would suggest a good injector cleaner, maybe something you put in your gas and run it for a while. There are some higher grade injector cleaners out there in kit form that you actually run like a detergent through the system. You may need to do a little research on that, look online and see what that's all about. Maybe clean the injectors, and that might take care of the problem.
I just had another thought where you were describing that, Jim. A good way to possibly find this problem injector, what cylinder it's actually located on, is pull the plugs. I would think a plug on a cylinder with a leaking injector might be a little sootier than the other ones, might be a little darker, might have a little black deposits on it. That could possibly be an indication that that cylinder is running rich, because not only will it leak while you're sitting still, what it will also do is it will leak as it's running. So it won't necessarily have a proper injector spray pattern, which Jim has suggested cleaning the injectors, which could bring this back up. It could just be a little piece of schmutz, for lack of a better word, that might be on the pintle of the injector that's causing it not to have a proper spray pattern and also stay open, thus leaking out the fuel itself. So you might be able to find that problem injector. If the fuel injector cleaner does not work, you may eventually have to go back and replace that injector. And possibly a good way to find it is to do it to check the plugs.
Yeah, that's a good plan there, because if that is the situation, it's going to cause some soot, which should theoretically darken the plug, at least more than the others. So yeah, good thought on that.
Okay, here's a quick one. Joe Joe Ham Radio again. He also has a quick question. What kind of plugs do you recommend for the Chevy 350 5.7 liter Vortec, NGK or AC Delco, and why? Personally, I say AC Delco. What do you say, Jim?
Well, I was going to say I get this sort of thing all the time. That's not quite true, but it comes up quite often. Having spent almost 40 years with manufacturers, this is what I've learned. These people that build these engines and develop these systems spend millions and millions of dollars and tons of man hours on dynos trying to figure out what works the best in that engine in that vehicle. And so here's what I always say. If the engine came from the factory, in this case with the Delco plug, that's what you want to put back in there, because it's the right heat range, it's going to work properly, and I would say go with that. Now, the only time I would change a heat range or a different plug is if I had changed something like a cylinder head or a compression ratio or, something. But if it's a stock engine, I would go with what it came with, and then it's just going to work better.
Jim, you pretty much almost said verbatim what I've been saying forever on the same thing, and it's true. I agree. They spend a lot of time and effort. It's not like they just say, we got these plugs on the shelf, let's throw them in this engine and ship it. That's not what engineers do. They spend a great deal of time and effort trying to figure out how to make their product work the best that it possibly can. And if the manufacturer comes up with a specific plug, and many times it's listed right underneath the hood on the underhood sticker, it says use these plugs. And I would strongly suggest you stick with that recommendation. And going outside that recommendation, unless, as Jim said, you're modifying the engine, you're doing something different, and basically creating your own engine and re-engineering it, there is very little motivation to go outside of what the manufacturer has already spent a great deal of time and effort in doing.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Oh, Leanne, she's She's an avid follower. Cool. It looks like a hybrid question. Oh, well, no, she doesn't have a hybrid. Hey, Eric, I don't have any hybrid questions for Jim, except to say that I will be taking a hybrid class at school during the spring semester. But Eric, now that you have a brake lathe, and assuming you will be machining some drums and rotors, as opposed to automatically replacing them with new, with regard to rotors, have you ever applied a non-directional surface and used soap and water wash trick to prevent brake noise? Also, I hear that some experts recommend replacing wheel cylinders and springs both, return and hold down, each time rear shoes are replaced. Finally, is it ever appropriate to overhaul wheel cylinders? Are shoe clearance gauges helpful? Can you comment on these? Well, that's several questions, Leanne.
Yeah.
Jim, if you don't mind, I'll start with these.
Go for it.
As far as these go. Yes, in fact, I have a special tool to put a non-directional surface on rotors, and that's something I was going to show in a video when I did demonstrate how to machine rotors. So I have done that. As far as soap and water, I haven't gone that far. My experience is, honestly, yes, a good surface on the rotor is optimum no matter what. However, it's the friction material you use. It seems the cheaper the friction material you buy, the more chances you have for noise. So quality friction material goes a long way to help eliminate noise. Now, as far as replacing wheel cylinders and springs on rear brakes, wheel cylinders, I don't necessarily do. I just inspect them. I pull back the boots to see if there's any fluid that comes out. If there is, yes, I replace the wheel cylinders. However, as a general rule, I'm not in there to replace wheel cylinders. As far as the springs go, yeah, I mean, springs are cheap. They're cheap insurance. They're the return springs. They basically are an integral part of how the brakes operate. So throwing in a hardware kit along with rear shoes, that's not a problem at all. And in fact, I would recommend that. It's not always necessary, but I'd recommend it. I mean, but when you consider how often you actually replace drum brakes, they take a lot longer than disc brakes to wear out. I've seen drum brakes well over 100,000 miles before they actually wear out. Rear brakes do a lot less braking than front brakes. And as far as drum brakes go, they just don't wear out a whole lot. So replacing those hardware springs and everything after years, they get rusty, they get old, the metal gets fatigued. Replacing those with new, not a problem. As far as wheel cylinders, I wouldn't do that right out of the box. As far as shoe gauge clearances being helpful, I guess it depends on how you use them. If it's something that's right for you. As far as overhauling wheel cylinders, don't bother. They're cheap. And honestly, I would say that your success rate with overhauling wheel cylinders was probably going to be pretty low. It's mostly corrosion on the inside of the cylinder itself that causes them not to seal any longer. And it's kind of a waste of time to go in there and try to do anything with it. Jim, I'll put it back to you.
Yeah, I'll put a little polish on that. I agree with the wheel cylinder part of it. I will pull it back if they're leaking. And if they're not, leave them on there. The springs definitely want to replace because rust and heat over time is going to cause them to lose their tension, and they're not going to be as effective and do the job that they're supposed to do. So I would always replace the brake hardware. The springs, the little pins, that go through the backing clip that hold the shoes on, replace all that hardware when you replace the shoes. And now, as far as the rotors go in the front, yep, I wash them in soap and water, and all the kids do it, and we just feel that the sprays that you put on there are going to leave some sort of a residue. Soap and water leaves none. And so we've always done that. In fact, my daughter just changed her brakes a few weeks ago at our place, and she had somebody helping her, and she dragged them into the kitchen and sink and washed them with Dawn and water, and kind of surprised this fellow, and she explained the whole thing like I'm explaining it right now. I think it's the best way to do it. It's just a personal opinion, but that's what I recommend. Here's something, though, on the finish. No matter what the finish is, if you can take a ballpoint pen and write on that brake drum, you got a good finish. If you can't do it, it's still too rough.
That's an interesting tip. And it didn't equate to me as far as the soap and water thing. I've always just used brake clean, but you're absolutely right. Soap and water really is the best. I'm just kind of lazy. I got a can of brake clean in my hand. I got a rotor in my hand. I do that. I have to walk a few steps to actually use soap and water to clean the cosmoline off the rotors, which the reason why you need to do that, you need to clean like a new set of rotors, is because when they're shipped, they're coated with something called cosmoline, which is a rust inhibitor. And you want to remove that rust inhibitor before you put the brake pads on, because it will embed itself into the brake pads and possibly cause brake noise. So Jim is absolutely 100% correct. Soap and water is the best way to clean those. And now, are we also talking about after you've done a machine finish yourself, that is something that's also applicable, or just, are you good after you're just done machining it without doing anything other than maybe wiping it down with a rag, or soap and water still the way to go on a freshly machined rotor?
I think after machining, as long as you don't have any machine oil or anything on your hands, you're probably good to go at that point. Go ahead and do the ballpoint pen test, and then you know you got it right, and go ahead and put it on. I think the cleaning, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with brake clean in the can. The stuff works just fine. It just does leave a residue, and I think soap and water is better. But on brand new ones, when you take them out of the box, you do have to get that rust inhibitor off. This is where they need to be cleaned up with something.
Right.
After a machining operation, if your hands and your rag and stuff aren't oily and stuff, go ahead and put it right back on the vehicle.
Right. Right. Okay. Let's move on to another one. Here we go. Steve Z, what is an inexpensive way to recover AC refrigerant? Is it possible to use another car's AC compressor to recover the refrigerant, connecting a hose from the high side of your car working, and then the other hose to the low side of the second car, then a hose to the high side of the second car to a recovery tank? What kind of tank should be used to recover the refrigerant? I'm just going to come out right out and say no.
I was going to say yikes.
I'm just going to say
no.
Don't
do that.
The cheapest way to do it, I think, is go to your local service station. I mean, it's really just a matter of them hooking up the hoses, hooking up the machine, and pushing a button, and it's recovered. And I can't see how they can charge you a great deal of money for that. But I mean, just go to they might be mad that they're not making money off the AC repair or whatever. But the responsible thing to do is, I say, just go to your local service station or make an appointment or whatever, and go in there and just say, I just need my AC or my refrigerant recovered out of my system. And that would be the best way to go, in my opinion. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, here's the issue. First of all, yep, they're going to get basically a free pound or so or two of refrigerant. And I can't see them charging a lot for that either. But here's the other thing. They're probably not going to be 100% sure what's in there, and they're going to want to put a refrigerant identifier to make sure that you don't have anything else in that system. They shouldn't be in there, like propane or something. And so they're going to charge something for the job because of that.
Well, many recovery machines come with those identifiers built in, but you're absolutely correct that it's. I would say even with trying to identify the refrigerant, it should only be a nominal charge. But I appreciate the effort. I appreciate the fact that instead of just cracking open a line or something like that and just venting the refrigerant to the atmosphere, you're actually choosing to find a way to recover refrigerant.
Yeah, I was kind of impressed with that idea. I wouldn't do it, but I think it's a pretty cool thought.
Well, and that's my point. Not the idea itself, just the thought behind it, in that, and trying to be responsible rather than just venting the refrigerant to the atmosphere, trying to come up with a method. Not having to involve, or an AC recovery machine, or spending money to have the refrigerant recovered. So I was applauding the effort, not necessarily the method.
Yeah, me too. That's what I meant. And the thought behind it was great.
Travis Owen asks, he loves the video. They really helped me move from a relatively useless in-car maintenance repair to a pretty confident DIYer. Yay. I love building confidence. My question is about a 2004 Honda Accord LX with the V6 with 220,000 miles on it. I've heard a squealing, grinding noise from the driver's side rear wheel for approximately the last year, and it only presents itself while I turn left. The noise frequency correlates with the speed of the wheel. I surmise that something is making contact with something else that it should not, perhaps the brake rotor contacting the shield that sits behind it, or perhaps a wheel bearing beginning to fail. Do you have any other suggestions for what I should check in this instance? Thanks so much for the great bids. Keep them coming. I'll start on this one. It's not a wheel bearing. Wheel bearings don't make that kind of noise. It's like a low rumbling type of noise, and it's consistent. It's not something that happens periodically, like what you're describing. My first thought is get that wheel off and get a look at your brakes, particularly the inboard pad. My experience with Hondas in particular, or just with disc brakes, and especially rear disc brakes in general, tend to suffer from a lack of service, meaning that you have to go in there periodically, remove the brake pads, clean the slide pins, and lubricate them with silicone and make sure the pads are moving properly. I see more issues in rear brakes in particular, once again, because they're not doing as much work. But with disc brakes, especially with around where I am in the rust belt, if you will, a lot of corrosion. And when that corrosion happens, it actually gets in between the shim where the pad rides and the brake pad itself. And that rust buildup decreases the clearance in there. And when that happens, those pads don't move properly. And as a result, particularly on turns, because believe it or not, your wheel, when you go around turns, bends and flexes. And as it does this, it can bend and flex other parts, such as those brake components. I mean, I think you're spot on by thinking it might be the rotor coming into contact with something. And also that splash shield on the back there, that's another possibility, especially if somebody's recently gone in there and done brake work. I have people come to me and say, I just recently put brakes on my car and I can't get rid of the squeal. Well, maybe inadvertently you might have hit that splash shield, and now it's making contact with the rotor and causing that noise that you're hearing. So that's a good inspection is where I would start with that. Oh, and lastly, also debris. Sometimes little rocks or other road debris might get caught in between brake pads and the rotor itself, or between that splash shield that I mentioned, and cause a noise similar to what you're describing. All of this can often be solved with a good brake service, and I stress taking the brake caliper off taking it apart so that you can actually physically see the inboard pad, because the outboard pad in those instances may look fine. It's the inboard pad that you don't necessarily see unless you remove the outer part of the caliper. So make sure you do a thorough inspection, and while you're in there, do a brake service. I have a video on that. I'll post a link to that in the description when we're done. Jim, anything to add?
You pretty much covered it all. The only other thing that I was thinking is if this thing has a wheel speed sensor, it might be hitting the tone ring, or there might be something on the tone ring that gets hit. You might want to just check that while you're at it.
Yeah, because that wheel speed sensor is in essence a magnet. So if there are metal particles, particularly from, say, brakes that have worn out, you could have little metal bits that migrate towards that magnetic field, and as a result, it attaches itself to that speed sensor and does that. So it's definitely worth looking into that as a possibility. But once again, I would say it involves taking apart those brakes and getting a good look.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I have to. Now we're okay. Here we go. Robert Andrews. Hello, Eric, and welcome, Jim. Hey, Jim. Somebody acknowledges you. You exist, man. That was a joke.
Hey.
That was a joke, Jim. All right. These are the jokes, people. All right. First, thank you so much for doing this, Eric, and for your channel, and great, generally amazing help. I'm losing hair over a P0500 code, which is a speed sensor code, and I can't get my speedometer to work. First, I tried changing the sensor to no success. Then I checked the wiring, and it all looks okay. I have changed the transmission fluid, yet still no success. Yet worst of all, my mechanic couldn't get to the bottom of it. He told me he thinks it's the main computer that would be best at the dealer. Also, I should note that the transmission isn't original. It's a rebuilt, I believe. I say this because it's a funky blue color and the paint looks newish. I've also tried to see if I even have a reading from the sensor, and I get nothing on the scan tool, yet everything else gives me data. Oh, and the revolutions, gas, temperature, and other needles work. Oh, okay, so the tachometer. What are your thoughts on this? It's a 2002 Toyota 4Runner 3.4 liter SRS 4x4. It gives us this VIN number, but I don't think that's really relevant in this case. Blue transmission that looks newish, and a speed sensor that doesn't work, and a P0 or a speedometer that doesn't work, and a P0500. What do you make of that, Jim?
Well, the only thing that comes to my mind after listening to that dissertation was that sometimes it's just not the components themselves, like a sensor. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it is the wiring in between the sensor and a PCM that could be causing the problem too. So you could have a sensor doing its thing, but no signal is received where it should be received. So that may be something that needs to be checked out, especially since the scan tool doesn't see anything.
Well, he did mention that he checked the wiring. Now, what exactly that means, I'm not sure, because if memory serves, that wiring harness is typed up in a rather difficult to access area. But the red flag that goes off in my mind is we have a rebuilt transmission that's, you know, a kind of a big question mark. And if, you know, somebody didn't assemble it properly, and maybe there isn't anything making contact with that sensor, maybe pull the sensor out and look to see if there's a gear in there it's even making contact with, because memory serves, those are just plastic gears.
Yes, that's a very good point. That plastic gear, yep.
So if
that's good.
Yeah, so if there's no gear there to even spin it in the first place, then it won't be putting out a signal. But I also agree with you as far as a wiring issue. And I suppose the only way to really verify that the wiring is good is to find the wires that go down to the speed sensor itself, find out where they terminate at the computer, and try to verify maybe with an ohm meter or something to see if there's something there. Because something like that with low voltage, I don't really see a voltage drop as being something that's possible.
No, you're right. It's an ohm meter check or a continuity check. That's
right.
What you're trying to do here. Exactly right. And the wire diagram will help with that.
I've got a video on electrical diagnosis where I do that very thing. I had a problem with a cooling fan on a vehicle that wasn't working correctly, and I went out to where the wire terminated at a relay that it was supposed to be turning on, and I also checked at the computer, and then I verified that wiring in between those two components was good, and therefore I could basically condemn that component rather than the wiring in between it. So that may be how deep that rabbit hole goes for you. So we'll have to see. Well, Jim, I believe we have reached the end of our hour, and we somehow made it through despite our technical difficulties without getting a visual on you. It's not that Jim is not handsome. He just wasn't able to get our feed to work. What's the issue?
Yeah, well, you know, they can always go to the YouTube channel and see what I look like there, and maybe watch some of the videos that are there.
That sounds fantastic. And you know what? I'm going to put links to those videos, or a link to your channel down in the description, so people can do exactly that. I'm also going to put a link in the description to the resources from Advanced Auto to also help you with any automotive issues that you might have. I also have links to articles that I have on my website that may also help you. So we're just going to throw all kinds of automotive information at you down in the description of this video. So if we didn't get to your question, or you have other questions, those questions may be answered through those resources. Jim, do you have anything else to add this evening?
Not really. I really appreciate the time, the short time actually spent here, and answering the questions to your viewers. And I think that probably at SEMA, when we get together and have a little interview, we'll be able to talk a bit more about what you do and what I do, and we'll be able to present that information to your viewers as well. I'm
glad that doesn't just happen to me, Jim. But Jim, I want to thank you for your time tonight and your expertise. You're obviously a font of automotive information, and it was a pleasure having you on the show. And I close each of these videos with my tagline of be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. We'll see you next time. Thanks again, Jim, and thanks to Advanced Auto.
Bye now.
See you next time.